Good afternoon. My name is Adrian Dix. I'm BC's Minister of Health. To my left is Premier David Eby. To my right is the President of the BC Nurses Union, Aman. To her right is the acting CEO of the BC Nurses Union, or the interim CEO. I got to get these titles right. Jim Gould, who is also the chief negotiator for the BC Nurses Union in our discussions. I also want to note here, because he was at the technical briefing, the Deputy Minister of Health, Steve Brown, who is here as well. I think it's fair to say that we all understand at this time, and I think we've always understood this, but particularly at this time, the central role nurses play in our public health care system. In the Nurses Bargaining Association, there are 51,500 members. There are more nurses than that. But during this period of pandemic in particular, and the public health emergency that is the overdose public health emergency, nurses have played a role. Their courage, intelligence, generosity in the workplace is, I think, recognized by everybody, and their central role in the delivery of public health care services as well. In British Columbia, that's why I was particularly proud last Friday when we announced a tentative agreement in negotiations between the government, the Health Employers Association, and the BC and the Nurses Bargaining Association, which is overwhelmingly represented by the BC Nurses Union. It was a significant moment. I want to congratulate everybody involved in it. What we tried to do in these negotiations, and I believe we've succeeded in doing, is two sets of things. And there were two different tables in the negotiations to achieve these tasks. The first was to negotiate a renewal of the collective agreement, which is critically important for nurses. We both, obviously both sides, in a time of real challenges in healthcare for nurses. For example, in spite of leading the country in the recruitment of nurses and the addition of nurses to our public healthcare system since 2017, nurses are in demand. There are significant issues that affect the daily lives of nurses around overtime. The fact that for many nurses, casual circumstances seem better than permanent jobs in our public healthcare system. The fact that change needed to happen and to come quickly. So we had a table and a negotiation with the Nurses Bargaining Association and what's called the Public Sector Employers Association and the Health Employers Association. In addition to that, we had a second table, very similar to what occurred in our successful discussions with the doctors of BC, where we worked together to create what we both want, which is the #1 place in North America for nurses to work, which is to make improvements that patients would feel in every community, in every healthcare setting in our province. So that second table was between the Ministry of Health and, again, largely the BC Nurses Union. And so at both of those tables, we built on those efforts to make significant improvements. And I wanted to lay out some of the details of the tentative agreement that was built at those two tables and built at our combined work together. The tentative agreement reached on Friday, of course, covers on the collective bargaining side, to deal with that side first. General wage increases consistent with the shared recovery mandate that the government has been negotiating with, and all of you who are part of the technical briefing will have received the details on that, including, and in addition to that, a suite of incentives to recruit, retain, and support need-of-practice nurses to ensure that nurses who have worked in the system a long time are properly recognized and rewarded. There were also key non-monetary components, including Indigenous-specific anti-racism supports, such as 5 paid days of leave for ceremonial, cultural, spiritual purposes for Indigenous employees, and changes to selection language to permit employers to preferentially hire Indigenous employees in specific circumstances. That was that side of the agreement, and it's significant. In addition, at the second table, we worked together to make the improvements to public health care that people expect and that nurses as a group want. And so those efforts and those discussions focused on 3 critical components. and they built on the work that we are doing with our Health Human Resources Plan. The first is nurses' workload standards. The second are ongoing funding to support nurses. And the third is one-time funding, and I'm going to detail what those processes were now. First of all, with respect to nursing workload standards, we will be implementing in British Columbia, and we will be the first in Canada to do so, nurse-to-patient ratios in our public healthcare system. This is the leading international practice in terms of retention of nurses and the delivery of quality healthcare. It's a practice that has been put in place, for example, in Australia, and it's been an issue on which the BC Nurses Union has been advocating for decades. We will be implementing a standard minimum ratio model to reduce nursing workloads, increase staff safety, improve nurse retention, and improve access to safe, quality nursing services, and improve patient care. And we will be backing that up with significant financial support to achieve the new nurse-to-patient ratios in the next 3 years, in 2023-24, $200 million, in 24-25, $250 million, in 25-26, $300 million. All of that will be net new. And the parties have agreed to work together closely on a national and international recruitment strategy, working together to ensure that we achieve those ambitious goals. Second, there will be ongoing funding to support recruitment and retention of nurses, $108.6 million in annualized ongoing funding to create new full-time permanent clinical mentorship positions, to support new graduate nurses, internationally educated nurses, and nurses changing jobs, and new premiums for preceptorship of student nurses. Cost of those measures, $33 million. Funding for additional point-of-care nursing supports to expand elbow-to-elbow supports for point-of-care nurses, LPNs, RNs, RPNs, $25 million. The second will be ongoing policy funding. The third will be Earn and Learn, which is the expansion of the Employed Student Nurse Program, will allow additional nursing students to take part-time positions in the healthcare system while attending school. We're supporting that with $20 million of annual funding. And a retention incentive funding will be to support the development of retention premium based on years of service for nurses in the later stage of their career. Those are permanent measures, and I said, taken together, $108.6 million. And then there's one-time funding, $100 million in one-time funding to the Nurses Bargaining Association that will support career laddering opportunities, $20 million. A nurse support fund, $60 million. That will support the well-being of nurses. It will be jointly funded by the Ministry of Health and the Nurses Bargaining Association. It will expand mental health supports for nurses who hit the ceiling of their existing benefit plan, hardship support for members who exhausted employment insurance, long-term disability and other programs, and hardship supports for students. Third, there will be support for the nurse-to-patient ratio implementation of the Nurses Bargaining Association work. That's $5 million, and a significant national and international campaign to recruit new nurses across the system. In short, this is a coming together of the BCNU, of the government working together to make changes and improvements in our public healthcare system that makes this the place in the world, but especially in North America, that nurses want to come and work. It allows us to meet our continuing goals. You know that we've led Canada in the recruitment of nurses over the last 5 years after, frankly, in 2017 being at the bottom of that list. But we have to do more, and we have to do better. In the last year, for example, we've had 6 times the rate of growth in our nursing population and the rate of increase as Ontario, and Alberta has actually lost nurses in that period. But we are determined. This agreement shows the determination of the government and the BC Nurses Union to improve public health care. It stands beside an agreement with doctors and with our agreements with other healthcare workers, all of which support, of course, nurses and healthcare workers and doctors and health sciences professionals, but also seek to improve our public healthcare system, our common goal to support patients and help them in their most difficult periods in their lives, and to support nurses as they perform some of the most important services in society. And with that, it is my honor You see how that works? Just for people watching, those are the bells of the legislature. That's not the bell signaling the end of my presentation, but they're coinciding here, and it's my honor to introduce Aman Grewal. I think it's fair to say that this has been an exceptional period of work for the negotiating teams of the Ministry of Health and of the BC Nurses Union, the Nurses Bargaining Association in particular. And their leadership has been exceptional on these questions, and it's my honor to introduce Aman now.
Okay.
You good?
I think so,
Okay.
yeah. You can see me, right? Thanks. So thank you, Minister Dix and Premier Eby for this opportunity, and on behalf of BC nurses, we're very pleased with the government's investment in nurses to address the nursing staffing shortage, and this goes a long way in this investment in recruitment, retention, and the return of nurses into the nursing profession. Those that have left the profession, I am sure that after they hear the details of this potential PCA, that collective agreement that we're hoping to have ratified at the end of this month, that some of our nurses will be coming back. The support for our members through mentorship and preceptorship, the incentives there as we bring on the new nurses and the internationally educated nurses, having those mentorship positions available to be elbow to elbow with those nurses coming on will be very instrumental in providing them an opportunity to engage in nursing here in BC. We're very encouraged by the new diversity, equity, and inclusion language, as well as the Indigenous cultural language that's been provided. The impacts of these nurse-patient ratios on the work environment, not only for the members, but also for the public, is going to be instrumental with these minimum standard nurse-patient ratios being initiated. So with those impacts will be the care delivery, and we are hoping that there will be better outcomes for our patients, because the nurse will be able to spend more time with the patient and provide the care that the patients so deserve and that nurses really want to be providing. Recognition of our long-term, long career nurses, I'm one of those, and so the long service increments are very welcomed, and you know, nurses that have been in the system and throughout this pandemic and the opioid crisis, giving it their all, to recognize them, it goes a long way and will go towards retention. So the investment in the Nurse Support Fund for the mental health supports of nurses who were impacted by the realities of their experiences through the pandemic, the opioid crisis, the heat dome, and the other environmental crises that we've been through over the past few years, as well as the nursing staffing shortages. You know, that is something that I know that our members will be looking forward to using, because at the moment they only have $900 for psychological health support. We welcome all of these additional funds and the investment that is being made into the health and well-being of our nurses, to the improvement of the work-life balance, as well as the ability to provide the care to the citizens of BC. So thank you. Thank you.
And it's now my honor to introduce Jim Gould, who is the Chief Negotiator for the Nurses Bargaining Association and also the interim CEO of the BC Nurses Union. I'm used to giving presentations in this theater with people with shoes that are interesting. So thanks, Jim, for stepping up there and keeping our standards high. And with that, I'm happy to introduce Jim to the podium.
Thank you very much, Minister Dix and Premier Eby and Aman. Well done. On behalf of the NBA, this is an exciting time, an absolutely exciting time. The investments in healthcare, the investments in nurses represent an unsurpassed and historical set of investments, which we're very excited about. We're working hard right now on behalf of the NBA to help all of our members, the 51,500 members, understand the tentative deal. We'll be doing so until voting opens on the 20th of this month and closes on the 27th. This tentative deal, combined with the minimum nurse staffing ratios and funding that is attached, is going to have an incredibly positive impact on recruitment, retention, the return of nurses, and resetting the relationship between the Nurses Bargaining Association and the BCNU with government. We're very, very excited about that and very excited to be working together moving forward to ensure the success of minimum nurse staffing ratios. In our view, the results are clear. They've been proven in Australia. They've been proven in California. The results will increase the quality of patient care. They will decrease patient mortality. They will increase the job satisfaction for nurses in this province. They will increase the quality of nurses' work life, and they will increase the physical and psychological safety for nurses in this province. All fantastic. The combination of these efforts, I guess that's the note, the combination of these efforts will, without a doubt, make BC the best place in North America to be a nurse. And we're very excited about these announcements and look forward to working hard together. And thank you very much.
And now, I'm happy to introduce Premier David Eby.
Thanks very much, Adrian. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Aman, for your amazing work on this. Thanks to Stephen Brown and his team, who with Minister Dix and with the BCNU spent many days, nights, weekends working on this. I'll begin by acknowledging we're on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. I am so thrilled that we are here today announcing a tentative agreement with the BC Nurses Union, but more than that, that we are aligned in working together to improve the public health care system in British Columbia. I know there were many weekends and long days and evenings putting this together, and I know that working all night is nothing new to nurses. My wife Kaylee was a registered nurse. She's now a family doctor, so I'm familiar with the hard work and the long hours that nurses put in. Nurses often work 12 to 16-hour shifts, and these days, too often short-staffed and in overcrowded units. Incredibly stressful work. The past few years have been hard on nurses. They have been pushed to the max through a global pandemic, a toxic drug crisis, climate emergencies. What we saw through the COVID-19 period was really the exposure and the exacerbation of serious issues, existing issues within our healthcare system, and new challenges as well. We know that nurses support people in British Columbia every single day. That's what they do. It's who they are. And today is about our government, about British Columbians supporting nurses, thanking them for that work. Recently in my community, I met a constituent of mine, a person I represent, who I know, and she was so proud her daughter was in school to become a registered nurse. And I'd worked with her daughter as a young person in my constituency, and I was excited for her too, but she said, listen, David, I'm worried about what work is going to be like for her when she's done school. The government really needs to support nurses. I'm worried about what her work conditions will be like and whether she'll be able to stay in that work. She was proud, but she was worried. And that combination, I think, reflects how British Columbians feel about our healthcare system. They are proud that we have a public healthcare system, but they're worried about making sure that it's going to be there for them when they need it. And this agreement is how we address that, and specifically about how we support nurses in this work. These challenges and concerns are not unique to our province, feeling them across the province or across the country. And there are all kinds of suggestions about how we address this issue, including that we abandon the principles of universal public health care, and that we allow people with deep pockets to buy their way to the front of the line. We know that won't solve the issue. It will pull medical professionals out of the public healthcare system. It only changes who's at the front of the line. We have to address the systemic issues, which is what this tentative agreement is all about. Abandoning public health care is not our approach, and it never will be. Supporting people who work in this healthcare system absolutely will be. That's why we're strengthening public health care and supporting those who care for patients, both in this tentative agreement that we're so excited about today, but also in our work with doctors, health sciences professionals, and other health professionals. We're investing nearly $1 billion in BC's health human resources strategy. This will help us recruit, retain, and train health workers and professionals, including nurses. We've added over 600 nursing seats at public post-secondary institutions. We're providing bursaries to support healthcare assistants as they train for careers as licensed nurses. And we're helping more internationally trained nurses get off of the sidelines and get into our healthcare system, into BC clinics and hospitals to support our hardworking health professionals. People like Jenny and Monique, who I met at Langara College, who are training and are now have good jobs caring for patients in our province. This new staffing model builds on the work we've done over the last few years. It's the first of its kind in Canada. It allows nurses to spend more time with the patients that they care for. It's what they want to do. They want to provide better, more people-focused services, and that's what this tentative agreement allows. It sends a strong message to nurses here in BC, across Canada, around the world. We value your work, and we value you. We're committed to ensuring that nursing is the safe and rewarding career that it should be, a career that allows people to build a good life in BC for themselves and for their families. One where you can focus on doing what you do best, caring for your patients. I look forward to continuing our work together to build a stronger, healthier, and more secure British Columbia, where everyone gets the care that they need and no one gets left behind. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aman. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Adrian. And thank you so much to all of the nurses across the province.
So I'm the MC. That's what I have to do. So we'll throw it open to questions. And that's over to you.
Thanks very much. A reminder to media on the line, please press *1 to enter the queue. We are going to start in the room with Richard Zussman, Global News.
Nurses are in demand in every jurisdiction in the world. What makes you believe that British Columbia can recruit and retain nurses to the level that are needed to hit these ratios? And how quickly should patients expect to see these ratios in place?
Well, they can see that because, and these things are relative, of course, there are extraordinary challenges in healthcare, that we're actually doing it. Last year, we saw an increase of 6.7% in the number of registered nurses in BC. In Alberta, it was 0.7% minus. In Ontario, it was 1%. So these are the policies that we've been engaging in for some time. As you know, we went through a period from 2009 to 2016 where there was no increase at all over those 7 years, zero in the net number of registered nurses in BC. So we had ways to go. In terms of LPNs, for example, it went up 8.4% in the past year. This is according to the Canadian Institute for Health Information. It was 5.4%. In Alberta, with nurse practitioners, it was even dramatically higher than that. It was an increase of 25%. So we have been, but we have to do more. And how do we do that? First of all, here, it's not just about recruitment, it's about retention. It's ensuring that when people choose the nursing profession, that they have the supports that they need, the work-life balance they need to make it a career and not a job for a few years. So retention is a key element. The changes that we announced with Aman Grewal a number of months ago about changes in security systems, the relational security system model that we've put in place is an example of that. So retention is key in terms of what we're doing and also bringing potentially people back into the profession. Secondly, we've got to increase the amount of people we train in BC, and we're doing that. 604 new nursing positions just this year, just announced net new nursing training positions. In addition to that, we have to have new pathways to international educated nurses. We made significant announcements last April, again with the BCNU, and in December, the Premier made with the BCNU at that point. And so all of those measures are in part have resulted in some success so far. We've got to do more. And this agreement, which significantly improves the quality of life of nurses, which invests in nurses, which puts world-leading standards in terms of the ratio proposal, which is a world-leading standard, are going to help us even more. So we are committed together to doing this. Just as the agreement with Doctors of BC, developed again together with Doctors of BC, has led to 2,630 people joining a new payment model in a month. And that's more, the majority of doctors existing doctors and added 300 who didn't practice longitudinal family practice. When we work together with health professionals, we can achieve great results. And I have high expectations. And all of the money I've talked about will be invested in nursing. And that's been our commitment, and that's our commitment in the discussions.
What is the expectation around timing in terms of when patients are going to see these changes actually in place? And does this factor in casuals and part-time workers that are currently in the system? There are people who choose that path for various reasons. There's few mentions of casuals in terms of this new agreement. Is the expectation that they will be offered full-time jobs to help supplement the shortage? And for Aman, what's the sense of ratios now? I know it may depend, but in a typical situation, what is a ratio now in a busy day in a hospital in BC?
Well, we'll go through. I can go through, and perhaps in a further question, people will ask details about the ratios being proposed. We don't have that model now. And one of the frustrations and one of the key elements, I think, for both ourselves and the BCNU in these discussions is that all of these issues, staffing issues, were inconsistently applied across facilities, sometimes, certainly across health authorities and also across facilities in the province. So this represents significant changes. When does it start? It starts, well, I think the vote on the agreement will be, it will be announced April 27th, so those decisions up to them will be up to BC nurses as they should be. But we're working right now. And some of the things that we've announced to make things better have already come into place, right? Which include the new nursing spaces, which include the improved pathways for IENs, which include the new security model, which include, and then this will add to that, and I think give it very significant momentum. And I think the final and important part of it is the joint work we're going to do together to make life better for nurses and to recruit nurses is going to have a very significant impact. We can share in detail what we have, the targets in terms of ratios that we've set in the agreement. We can share that with everyone. Probably wouldn't serve to announce that now, and I'll turn it over to you, Aman.
Thanks, Richard. So in terms of the improvements that we're going to see with these nurse-patient ratios is that now we will have a standard minimum. And based on that, we will know how much staff needs to be on each unit. Right now, because of the shortages, they are seeing increased numbers of patients. So you could have 1 nurse to 8 patients. And as Minister Dix has said, they will provide you the documents that have the ratios in there, but there are significant improvements in those. And, you know, being able to provide the care to the patients and spending that time with the patient, providing the care that that patient requires at that time. Usually the nurses are trying to prioritize whose needs are the most at that time. So this will give that nurse that little bit of time that they can give extra care to those patients that they so deserve and that the nurses always are striving to provide.
Next question, Binder Sachin, CTV.
Just following up on one of the several questions my colleague asked with regards to timing. I know that the contract still needs to be ratified, but are we talking months or weeks or like into next year to see these ratios in place? And what does that look like for a patient who's attending a hospital then? And I mean, if you can also weigh in as well, like when these ratios are in place, how will people notice that difference?
Well, I think you see that it's built up over the 3 years. So the first year is 200, the second year is 250, the third year is 300 million in terms of the expenditure. And so, but the recruitment effort, that starts now and has been in place since for a significant period of time. And of course, a very significant number of the actions in the Health Human Resources Plan were about nursing. That's natural given the important role of nurses in healthcare. So we're proceeding. The intent would be to proceed, but it's obviously the first step is for nurses to ratify the agreement and have their own discussions, which will be, I think, significant. I think they plan, I'm sure, many meetings to discuss the details of the agreement with nurses. But I think from our perspective, this is urgent work. Healthcare systems open 24/7, 365. Today, in our acute care hospitals, we have 9,620 patients. on a base bed capacity of 9,200. So this is urgent to address health human resources for nurses, for healthcare workers, for health sciences professionals, for doctors. And so this work is going on, but we're going to be moving very quickly. And I think what will be, I think, important and unique is the work that we're going to get to do together to recruit people to become nurses in BC, and the changes that are being put in place to make life better and to retain nurses in BC. Those will be significant changes. And the work is continuing, but clearly, assuming if this agreement is ratified, this will give extraordinary momentum to those changes.
Thanks, Binder. So with these timelines, et cetera, we will be, as a union, making sure that we are working closely with the government to make sure that we are abiding by those timelines, to make sure that we are getting forward with providing those ratios. But that's going to take some time as well. But the hope is that as our nurses who left the system either went casual or completely left the system, that once they see that working conditions are improving and there's a lot of flexibility, one of the things that we're working towards is the flexibility for our nurses so that they have the ability to be able to flex their schedules, etc. So for them to be able to have that, they will want to come back to a profession that they love and that they want to be a part of. And so we're hoping that this will encourage them to come back as well.
And I know that safety on the job is also a huge issue. You talked about the security measures, but is enough being done, and again to Aman as well, in terms of addressing the safety concerns of nurses to make sure that BC can actually recruit people from other places?
Well, I think those issues and the issues of code whites are issues that are felt in all jurisdictions. But we want to obviously make those improvements to recruit, but we also want to make those changes and are making them together because they're critical. These are our nurses, our employees, and they deserve to be safe in their workplaces. And that's why we put in place, and we announced it together. It had been a long-standing request of the Hospital Employees Union, of the BC Nurses Union, of the Health Sciences Association, for a new model of security, a relational security model that we're putting in place, and which that's going on now. We have a year to do it, and we're putting that in place. So we're taking the actions I think necessary to improve the safety of all those on the workplace in the public healthcare system, and we would expect that. It's been, I think it's fair to say, an exceptionally challenging time in public healthcare and for healthcare systems everywhere. But this is a fundamental priority for that, and you see it also in the improvements and supports for nurses on mental health and other issues that were key priorities for the Nurses Bargaining Association, for ourselves in these discussions. All of those provide supports for workers because retention, in terms of the success of our health human resources strategy, is as important as recruitment. Recruiting and then losing someone is over a period of years is not a strategy. We have to improve the workplace, and that's what we're committed to working together to do, and we already are putting that in place.
So one of the things with nurse-patient ratios is that you aim for nurse-patient satisfaction, the patient satisfaction, the resident, the client in the community. And if you have the staff being able to respond in a timely manner and they're not stretched thin, having those ratios will improve the quality of care that is being provided and those outcomes and the morbidity rates. So having more nurses gives them more time to spend with the patient and their needs, and we look forward to improving on that.
Next question comes from Katie DeRosa, Vancouver Sun.
Hi, Minister. So Statistics Canada figures from March show that we're already at 7,000 vacancies for nursing positions. So considering it would take 7,000 more nurses just to bring us to the baseline, how many more nurses have to be added to meet these new ratios?
Well, what the statistics show is the significant increase in nurses we've had over the last number of years, and that we need more, right, to meet our demands. And remember, we've significantly enhanced public health care in a number of areas. So that reflects as well the demand of providing more mental health and addiction services, the important role nurses and others will play in complex care, in supportive housing, in community care, and in long-term care. And so we've added a significant number of positions, and we have a recruitment strategy that is training more nurses, that has thousands of nurses in the pipeline as internationally educated nurses. And now will be, I think, the best place in North America for nurses to work. So we're going to work together to retain, because that's important. You improve your retention rate and you close that gap, and to recruit nurses. And I'm confident we'll be able to do that. And remember, when you talk about the amount of money we're talking about, so the question is, when are you starting? Well, we're starting in this fiscal year, the one that we're now in. And that's, we expect, and the plan is to spend $200 million of that money in the first fiscal year and then to build out in subsequent years. That's a significant investment in new nurses to meet the requirements of both of the ratios and improving public health care. So I think the short answer is yes, that we've had to, in a public health care system that doesn't take a day off, we've had to use all kinds of techniques, and nurses will tell you this, over time. And we've brought in we have a significant casual base of nurses, and 1.4% of our care hours are provided by agency workers now. That was particularly true in COVID-19, because when we added new services such as contact tracing, we didn't want to bring them out of the hospital to provide those services. We couldn't do it at that point. So we have to continue, and the purpose of this is to have a strong, permanent nurse workforce that has a higher quality of life and a higher quality of work, and is providing better care for patients. And that's the work we're doing. But in terms of recruitment of nurses, we're doing better than anywhere else in Canada right now, but we've got to do a lot better than that.
Aman, does the union have an estimate of how many nurses will have to be added to meet the ratios, and what will happen if those ratios are not met? Will that be collective, will that be grievances? Will that be compensation for nurses? Like, what happens if the ratios aren't met?
So I'll just answer just briefly and then turn it over to Aman, just to say that what we're talking about is hours and not FTEs, because all these discussions of FTEs, people do use different bases, StatsCan different than others, right? So we'll be adding, we'll have goals to add hours. In terms of the money that's been assigned to this, 200, 250, 300, say in the first year on the recruitment, we were to spend 198 million, and there was 2 million left. That money, that $2 million, in discussion with the Nurses Bargaining Association, will be put towards nurses, either retention bonuses, training, supports for mental health, et cetera. So if we don't meet in that first year, for example, that expenditure and the hours that flow from that, that money will be reinvested in nursing in every case. And that is part of the working together we have, and that would be the same in the other fiscal years. So when you talk about grievances, it's not grievances. The response, if that were to happen, and all the commitment we have to make it happen, to recruit nurses and retain nurses and support nurses and ensure that we provide the right incentives to nurses, that should it be that we fall short in terms of the full expenditure of that money, we will work with the Nurses Bargaining Association, the BCNU, to ensure that all of the money committed goes into nursing, so it's not a savings to government or able to be put anywhere else.
Thank you. So as you mentioned, the vacancies that are out there, and I'm actually going to defer to Jim Gould to answer the rest of this question as our chief negotiator.
Thank you, Aman. It's a very good question. In short, the NBA has not waived any of its rights vis-a-vis the province. And instead, what has happened, and further to what Minister Dix is expressing, is that there's an absolute commitment, and we had success negotiating with the province to establish that all of the money that has been earmarked will find its way to the benefit of nurses in this province. That's the first time that I'm aware that this has happened. It's an exciting move forward. and I think it represents the serious commitment of the province and the MBA in ensuring that this is a successful outcome.
Next question comes from Mirabane, CBC.
I would just like that answer in French, please. So this is for Minister Dix, just on enforcement of nurse-to-patient ratios in hospitals across BC. How will that be enforced in terms of, what's the accountability there?
So significant. First of all, it's laid out in detail, and we'll share the details of that because there's a bit of it. But for example, in inpatient care. The question was in French. No, I know. Well, just in terms of the ratio, I'll do it in French. I'll do it in French.
I thought my French got awesome.
No, French got off. He understood everything. Well, they call my French a language other than English. But in terms of the enforcement of the agreement and the money in the agreement, all of that money would flow to nursing. So de dire en français que on va si on a une obligation de dépenser 200 millions de dollars. Disons, la première année, c'est 198. L'autre 2 millions de dollars va être investi dans le travail des infirmières. Donc, je pense que ça, c'est quelque chose d'important et qui démontre l'importance et la centralité d'améliorer la qualité de santé en Colombie-Britannique de la part du gouvernement et du BCNU.
Sounds okay. And so this question is for Aman Grewal. I think I asked it earlier, but I'll ask it again. I'm wondering, was there anything in this tentative deal that that's missing, that you would have liked to have seen some improvement on for nurses in BC?
Jim?
I'm going to defer to Jim here.
Truly appreciate the question. Unfortunately, we haven't had the opportunity to put the tentative deal before all of our membership, and that's where it belongs first. As soon as we've had an opportunity to do so, and the membership has had an opportunity to consider the deal, at that time, and only at that time, will we be releasing it to the public.
All right, and we only have time for one more question. Apologies to reporters on the phone. Our last question comes from the room. Wolf Deppner, Black Press.
Thank you for taking my question. This concerns healthcare in rural areas. How will this agreement impact, for example, emergency rooms in places like Elkford that have been closed for some time? How will this sort of aid in the reopening of emergency rooms in communities like just mentioned, as well as other communities? Thank you.
Well, I think this agreement and the investment is important for patients everywhere, but I would argue that it's most important for people in rural healthcare because it's the supports, the incentives, the sustainment, the priority it provides to rural health centers is critically important and critically central to all of our discussions. Certainly, it was represented at the table both by ourselves and by the BCNU. I'll give you an example, though. I mean, these are issues that we work through and shows the difficulty of issues. In the case of Clearwater, where we had significant issues and they were in the media on a regular basis until September 1st, there hasn't been a closure in the emergency room in September 1st. The changes we made in working in that case, in the individual case, with the union included addressing issues around housing in that community where employment was so high and the availability of housing so little that it was very challenging to meet the staffing demands for nursing in that community. You see similar steps being taken in Port Hardy, for example. But I think that this process, the place that it will be felt most significantly in terms of the recruitment of nurses, in terms of internationally educated nurses, in terms of the incentive provided, will be to rural healthcare. And that's that we had in our mind's eye, because that's the place where the immediacy sometimes of health human resources issues are most keenly felt. And so I think people in particular in Port Hardy and in Clearwater and in Elkford and in communities around the province that depend on nursing, I think they're going to see the changes that we've made up to now and then these changes felt really strongly.
And just to back on that subject, as though we already heard the figure of missing shortages in terms of nurses, the 7,000 figure. I didn't hear a figure that would tell the public how many more nurses you would need to implement the ratios. But how many nurses who are currently out of the system do you expect to be having back into the system? Do you have a figure, a ballpark figure, any sort of a specific figure that you can give on how many nurses currently out of the system you hope to have back in the system?
Well, the success of our ability to meet the demands of the ratios, but also demands of public health care, depends on training new nurses, depends on retaining existing nurses, and indeed to bringing people back into the system, or have people who are working on a casual basis come back and work full time. And all of those issues are addressed in this agreement. So it's not one response, it's a multiple of responses that are required. To give you an example, in registered nurses in the past year, that 6.7% represents net new 2,400 nurses in that year. Net new, all the nurses who were before. So we had 35,880 in 2020, 38,288 in 2021, the end of fiscal year 2021. And so what that shows is an ability to do that, but what it also shows is the need to pick that up, because as has been noted, we have significant vacancies, especially in the Northern Health Authority now, that we need to fill. And so we've got to do all that, and then we've got to do more, and that's why this common work together with nurses is so important in achieving those goals, and I'm confident we'll do it.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes today's event.
Merci beaucoup.